Hello. Thank you for joining me today. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, and leave me a comment if you enjoy my videos. Welcome to Nomad's Land Studios. Narrations by Rebecca. Nutcracker and the Mouse King by E.T.A. Hoffman. Chapter 11. The Victory. Not long afterwards, Mary was awakened one moonlit night by a strange tumult that seemed to come from one corner of the room. It was as if pebbles were being thrown and rolled about amid a hideous accompaniment of hissing and squeaking. "Ah, the mice! The mice are coming back!" cried Mary in terror, and would have waked her mother, but she could not utter a sound or even move a finger, as she saw the Mouse King working himself through a hole in the wall, till at length, with sparkling eyes and shining crowns, he advanced into the room. Then, with a mighty bound, sprang up on the small table which stood close to Mary's bed.
"Hee hee hee! Must give me your sugar plums, your toffee, small thing, else I bite that nutcracker of yours to pieces. Nutcracker, do you hear?"
So piped out the Mouse King, gnashing and clashing horribly with his teeth, and quickly sprang out of sight again through the mouse hole. Mary was so distressed by the dreadful apparition that next morning she looked quite pale, and could scarcely speak for inward agitation. 100 times she thought of telling what had happened to her mother, or to Louisa, or at least to Fred, but she asked herself, "Will any of them believe me, and shall I not be well laughed at by everybody?" Yet it was quite clear to her she must sacrifice her sugar plums and toffee to save Nutcracker. As much as she had of these nice things she laid out that evening on the edge of the cupboard shelf. Next morning her mother said, "I don't know how mice have got into our parlor. Just see, poor Mary, they have eaten up all your sweet stuff." Indeed it was so. The sticky toffee had not proved much to the taste of greedy Mouse King, but he had nibbled all over it with his sharp teeth, so that it must be thrown away. Mary did not take the loss of her sweets much to heart. Rather, she secretly rejoiced to think that it had saved Nutcracker's life. But what were her feelings when next night there came again a squeaking and squawking at her ear? Ah, it was the Mouse King back again, and still more horribly glowed his eyes than the night before, and still more hatefully hissed he between his teeth.
"Must give me your sugar and gingerbread figures, little thing, or I bite your nutcracker in pieces."
And with this, away scampered the grim Mouse King. In great distress, Mary went next morning to the cupboard, and sorrowfully looked at her sugar and gingerbread men. She had reason indeed to be sorrowful, for you can't think, my good reader, what dear little figures made out of sugar and gingerbread Mary Stahlbaum possessed. First of all, a very pretty shepherd with a shepherdess was feeding a whole herd of milk-white sheep, and his dog jumped close by quite like life. Then came 2 postmen with letters in their hands, and 4 fine couples of nicely dressed young men, with maidens elegantly adorned all over, were rocking themselves in a swing-boat. Behind some ballet dancers stood old King Cole, beside the Maid of Orleans, for whom Mary did not care so very much. But right back in the corner was a red-cheeked little child, her favorite of all. The tears sprang into small Mary's eyes. "Oh, dear Herr Drosselmeyer," she cried, turning to the Nutcracker, "whatever will I not do to save you? But still, it is hard." Nutcracker looked the while so sad that Mary, who could fancy she saw the Mouse King's 7 jaws open to devour the unhappy youth, resolved to sacrifice everything for his sake. All her sugar figures she set out this evening on the edge of the shelf, as before she had done with the goodies. She kissed the shepherd, the shepherdess, the little lambs, and, last of all, she fetched from the corner her favorite, the dear red-cheeked child, whom she took care to put behind all the rest. The gingerbread old King Cole and the Maid of Orleans had to stand in the first row. "Oh, this is too bad," exclaimed her mother next morning. "There must be a great nasty mouse living in the cupboard, for all poor Mary's pretty sugar figures are gnawed and bitten to bits." Mary could hardly keep back her tears, but she soon smiled again at the thought. What does it matter, so long as Nutcracker is safe? In the evening, when her mother told the counselor about the mischief a mouse did in the children's cupboard, Dr. Stahlbaum remarked what a pity it was they could not get rid of this pest, which played such tricks in the cupboard and ate up Mary's sweet things. "Well," put in Fred eagerly, "the baker who lives below us has a fine gray chamber counselor, which I can bring up. He will soon stop these doings and bite off the mouse's head, were it Lady Mousykins herself or her son, the Mouse King." "Yes, by jumping about on chairs and tables," laughed his mother, "and upsetting cups and glasses, and doing ever so much more damage." "Not at all," answered Fred. "The baker's cat is a clever fellow. I wish I could walk as steadily along the sharp roof as he can." "Only let us have no puss at night," begged Louisa, who could not bear cats. "Fred is right," said his father. "But first we might try setting a trap. Have we none?" "We can get the best kind from Godfather Drosselmeyer, who invented them," cried Fred. All the rest laughed, and the mistress declaring that there was no trap in the house, the counselor said he had several, and sent at once for a first-class one. Their godfather's story of the hard nut came now clearly into the mind of Mary and Fred. While cook was toasting the bacon, Mary trembled with excitement, and, her head full of the story and its marvels, thus addressed their familiar Betsy. "Ah, Lady Queen, do beware of Mousykins and her family." But Fred had drawn his sword, bidding the whole race of mice come on, and he would soon clear them off. All, however, remained still, under and about the hearthstone. When now the counselor tied the shred of bacon on a thin thread, and softly, softly laid the trap in the cupboard, Fred called out, "Take care, Godfather Clockmaker, that the Mouse King plays you no trick." Ah, what had poor Mary to go through that night! There came an ice-cold creeping up and down her arm, and a loathsome breath on her cheek, and a piping and squeaking in her ear. The horrible Mouse King sat on her shoulder, blood-red foam dripping out of his 7 open jaws, and gnashing and clashing with his teeth. He hissed out to Mary, as she lay motionless for fear and dread.
"Hiss! Hiss! None of your bacon! Mouse King too sharp not to be taken. Trap very fine, but not what it looks. Give me out now your picture books. Do you hear? And your new frocks, too, else there shall be no peace for you. You very well know Nutcracker must go. I will tear him so. Hee-hee! Beep-bee! Squeak, squeak!"
Now was Mary overcome by sorrow and woe. She looked so pale and out of sorts that when her mother next morning remarked that the mouse had not been caught, believing Mary to be afraid of it and distressed about the loss of her sweets, she added, "But never mind, dear child. We will soon get rid of the naughty mouse. If traps are no good, Fred must bring up his gray chamber counselor." As soon as Mary found herself alone in the parlor, she went up to the glass cupboard, and, sobbing, spoke thus to her Nutcracker. "Oh, my dear, good Herr Drosselmeyer, what can a poor unhappy girl do for you? Were I to give all my picture books, even my beautiful new frock which I got as a Christmas present, to be torn to pieces by the horrible Mouse King, will he not then go on asking more and more, so that at last I shall have nothing left to give, and he will want to bite up me myself instead of you? Oh, poor girl that I am, what can I do now? What am I to do now?" Weeping and lamenting so bitterly, little Mary noticed that through the night a great spot of blood had been left on Nutcracker's neck, Ever since she knew that her Nutcracker was properly young Drosselmeyer, the counselor's nephew, she had given up carrying him in her arms, and cuddled and kissed him no more. Indeed, out of a certain shyness, she hardly liked to touch him. Yet now she took him very carefully out of the cupboard, and began to rub the blood spot from his neck with her pocket handkerchief. But what was her amazement when she all at once felt Nutcracker growing warm in her hands and beginning to move his limbs. Quickly she set him back in the cupboard, where his little mouth waggled shakingly up and down, and painfully he lisped out, "Ah, most worthy Miss Stahlbaum, excellent friend, how can I thank you for all? Yes, no picture book, no Christmas frock shall you sacrifice for me. Procure me only a sword, and I will answer for the rest. Let him do his worst." Here Nutcracker's speech died away, and his eyes, lately animated by an expression of inward grief, became again fixed and dull as glass. Mary felt no horror. Rather, she skipped for joy, now knowing the means to save Nutcracker without further sore sacrifices. But wherever was she to get a sword for the small man? She resolved to take Fred into counsel, and that evening, their parents having gone out, as these two sat together in the parlor by the glass cupboard, she told him all that had happened to her with Nutcracker and the Mouse King, and what was now required for the former's deliverance. Nothing of all this made such impression on Fred as how, according to Mary's report, his hussars had behaved themselves so badly in the battle. He just asked very seriously whether things had really gone as she said. And when she assured him on her word that it was so, he went at once to the cupboard, addressed his hussars with a moving speech, then, as a punishment for their selfishness and cowardice, cut the cockades off their hats, one after another, and forbade them to play the Hussar Guards' March for a year. His reprimand ended, he turned to Mary, saying, "As for the sword, I can supply Nutcracker, for yesterday I pensioned off an old colonel of cuirassiers, who does not need his sword any more." The said colonel was enjoying the pension assigned him by Fred in a back corner of the top shelf. Thence being fetched down, his smart silver-mounted sword was taken off him and hung round the waist of Nutcracker. That night Mary could not sleep for anxious dread. At midnight she thought she could hear in the parlor a strange stir, a clang, a confusion. All of a sudden it went squeak. "The Mouse King! The Mouse King!" cried Mary, and sprang startled out of bed. All was still, but soon there came a soft, soft tapping at the door, and a tiny voice made itself heard. "Dearest Miss Stahlbaum, now you can be at ease. Good, joyful news." Mary, recognizing the voice of young Drosselmeyer, threw on her dress and hurriedly opened the door. Outside of it stood little Nutcracker, the dripping sword in his right hand, a wax light in his left. As soon as he saw Mary, he knelt down on one knee, and spoke thus, "You alone, my lady, are she who steeled my heart with courage, and gave my arm strength to combat the haughty foe that dared insult you. Conquered lies the traitorous Mouse King, and wallows in his blood. Scorn not, O lady, to receive the tokens of victory at the hands of your till death devoted knight." With this, the Nutcracker pulled off the 7 golden crowns of the Mouse King, strung them round his left arm, and handed them over to Mary, who received them with delight. Then, rising to his feet, he went on, "Ah, my dearest Miss Stahlbaum, having now overpowered my enemy, what wonderful things could I not show you, if you would only have the kindness to follow me a little way. Please do, oh please do, dear young lady."